So at the beginning of this VBA section of this course, we discussed two types of procedures. We have sub-procedures, which we have been doing to execute lines of code, and then we also have functions. And as I mentioned before, functions is a group of reusable code that we can use in other sub-procedures, or we can insert this function into our worksheet just like all the other functions that we have been working with, like the sum function, VLOOKUP functions, and other conditional functions. So since we are familiar with worksheet functions, let's see how we can build a custom function inside of VBA that we can use inside of our worksheets. So inside the user-defined function sheet tab, our goal is to create a function that calculates the new student's test score, but with a curve added to their score. So within our Writing VBA code module, let's insert our first function. So we can type in function, and I'm going to call this function fgrade. And we know with functions is that they require arguments to calculate a value. So we need to specify the arguments needed for this function. But before we do that, we need to know how many points the curve will add to the student's score. So to calculate a curve, we need to take the highest grade in the class and then subtract that grade from 100. So if we take a look at our list here, we can see that the highest grade is 95. So 100 minus 95 is 5 points. So this function will add 5 points to each student's grade. So this function is going to require two arguments: the student's score and the range of scores, so we can figure out the highest score in the class. So for our first argument, we can type in open parentheses, and let's name this argument score. So this argument is the student's score, and then we need to declare this argument like we do with variables. So is this score value an integer, double, boolean, what? Well, if we don't declare it as anything, it automatically assumes variant. But since we know our score is between 0 and 100, we can declare score as an integer. And then for our second argument, we can put comma, and let's name this argument score underscore range. And for this argument, we will be selecting the score column, so we can declare it as a range. Close parentheses. So now we have created the fgrade function with its two required arguments, the score and the score range. So now we need to calculate the curve, which is finding the highest score in the class and then subtracting that score from 100. So let's think about this. What ways do we know on how to find the max value in a range of cells? Well, we can use the max function, right? Because if we use the max function for the score column, it should return 95, because that's the highest score within that column. So to calculate how many points the curve will add, we can type in C for curve equals 100 minus worksheet function, and then the function that we are going to use, which is max, so we can put dot max, open parentheses, and the max function just requires a range of cells, and it will produce the max value within that range. So since we are building a function that users can use inside their spreadsheets, we don't just want to specify this range of cells, C1 to C14. We want to allow them to select their own range of cells, which will be the score underscore range. Because once they entered the fgrade function into their worksheet, this function will require the user to insert a score argument and a score range argument. And this is where the user can select the range of cells to get the maximum value. So we got C, as in curve, equals 100 minus the maximum value within the range that they select. Now we need to tell Excel how this function should calculate. So we can put 𝗙_𝗏 equals our score argument, which is the student's score, plus the curve, which is just C. Because 100 minus the max, which is 95, C will equal 5. And this function will take the student's score and add 5. So we are actually done creating this 𝗙grade function inside of VBA. But now let's see how we can insert this function into our spreadsheet. So within the with curve column, how do we insert the 𝗙grade function? Well, it's just like any other function. So we can come up to our formula bar, type in equals, and if we start typing in our function name, 𝗙grade, we can see that our custom function has popped up. If we give this a double click, and then open up our function arguments window to see what arguments are required for this function, our first argument is the student's score, so we can select cell C2. And then for our second argument is the score range, which is all the scores within the score column. And I'm going to make this range an absolute reference by pressing F4 on my keyboard. So when we copy down this formula, this range will remain constant. And if we click OK, now our 𝗙grade function returned 94. Because 89 plus our curve, which is 5, equals 94. And we can double click our fill handle to copy this formula down. And now our function has added 5 points to each student's score. And that's how you can create a user-defined function. Now you might have to do this a few times to get it down, but as you can see, we can create these user-defined functions and use them in our spreadsheet like any other function, but in the back end inside of VBA, we can write lines of code to tell this function how to calculate. Now everything I just showed you could be done inside of Excel with basic formulas and functions. For example, if I come into F2 and I try to recreate the same value that our 𝗙grade function returned, I would have to type in equals 100 minus max of the score range, close parentheses, plus the student's score, equals 94. Now even though to create that formula, it was pretty simple to do, but sometimes these calculations will get a lot more complex. And instead of building out formulas like this, we can build functions inside of VBA so that users can just insert their arguments and our function will calculate it for them. And by just filling out the arguments looks a lot cleaner and easier to do than building out formulas. Now sometimes there might not be functions inside of Excel that can get you the answer that you're looking for. And if that's the case, you can just create your own function with your own calculations depending on your needs.